Hello everyone, it's Cassie. Welcome back for another Simon Hurley Create video. Today we're going to be using this adorable stamp set called Bird Buddies. I'm going to make 3 cards today just using this stamp set, and I probably could have made tons more because there's so much going on in this set and so many options, and it's just adorable. So we've got this set, and we're also going to be focusing on the Jewel Heist background. So the Jewel Heist background is from just the last release I just think this stamp set is so cool. It's a background stamp, red rubber, but look at that. It breaks apart into 3 pieces, but you can piece it all back together and have one big background. Is that not the coolest? All right, so let's go ahead and get started with our stamping. I've grabbed 3 of the birds from this stamp set. I'm inking that up with some Raven Detail ink, and I'm stamping that down onto some Simon Hurley Stark White cardstock. This stuff is a lot of fun. It's a little bit heavier weight, and it's really, I think, decent for Copic coloring. I enjoy Copic coloring on it. It really just soaks in that color really nicely. Instead of coloring this bird yellow, I decided to color him red because I really want him to stand out on the card. So here's what we're doing right now. We're going to go ahead and color all the birds that we're going to be using before we start making any of our cards. So I had ideas in my head already about the types of cards that I wanted to make, and I knew exactly how many pieces I wanted for each card, and that is where we've got all these random birds. So I have this piece, and I also have another piece. These are just some scraps of cardstock that I had. So I'm coloring him now with some Y17 for his beak and his feet. And then we're going to move on, after we're done coloring him, to the little blue-footed booby. I just think these 2 birds are too stinking cute. I looked up how to color them, and I was like, oh my gosh, there are legit birds with blue feet and beaks. It's just so cool. So these are awesome. You're definitely going to see these guys again. I love these little stamps, and I love how the one is like he's looking wonky, like he'd be me in the dancing. Actually, I'd probably be more the one standing there. So to me, these guys are dancing, and the one looks like he is really cutting a rug, and then the other one just kind of standing there was like, that would be me, like, what am I doing here? So I brought in some W1. I put down my lightest shade first. I don't do that on the other one, but I come in with some W3, and then I'm going to just kind of blend that out with that W1 again. For his wings and part of his feathers, I'm going to color with some E59 and E49. And that's what makes these birds so cool, is I love this color combination of like a warm gray, a brown, and then that really pretty blue. And so we'll blend those out just a little bit on those tail feathers with that warm one. So here we come in with a little bit darker color. I figured I would show you how I colored both of these birds since they're a little bit different. I mean, they're the same color combo, but I know some people like to see all the coloring just simply because, you know, each individual image, even if it might be the same type of image, it might be colored a little bit differently. And then I'm going to color these little baby birds. I know that, you know, you should probably color baby birds to be all sort of bright colors, but we all know that baby birds aren't so bright when they're first born. So, and I know these are cartoon birds, but for whatever reason, I just really wanted to color them to be like a gray. And then the nest, I'm using the same colors that I did for the little blue-footed booby's wings. And then we're going to color our peacock. So I'm going to have blue-footed boobies on one card, we're going to have that little red bird on another, and we're going to have a peacock and her babies on another card. So I'm coming in just with that V17, and then for our darker shade, we're going to use some V09. And you really can't tell the difference there too much, but we are definitely coming in with a little bit darker shade. And then we're going to come in with a different color of blue. So for the blue-footed boobies, I used just the blues, but here we're using blue-greens. I didn't show it. I will show it here in a second, but this is BG01. And that's going to be our blue color for our peacock. I'm sure y'all have heard by now, but Simon last week released a whole bunch of new products. And while I don't have them right now in this video, I will show you probably an unboxing when those things come. And I will link down below to the new products because they are super cool. And you're definitely going to want to check them out. I love how, Simon doesn't just come out with stamps and stencils and things like that. They are, they build on each other, and it's fun to use them together. And yeah, so I will have all that linked down below, so you'll definitely want to go and check that out. Okay, back to the cards, and now I'm going to go ahead and fussy cut all those out, as you can see, and we're going to move on to actually stamping our first card. So I've just got another piece of that Stark White cardstock by Simon Hurley, and I've put this into my MISTI. You'll notice I took out my foam pad and everything else because we're going to be using red rubber, and so you'll want to take out all the insides of your MISTI. And I'm just going to line these up. I'm showing you how cool this is, that you can take this stamp apart and you can stamp it separately. So I went ahead and did the bottom portion, and I've got that top portion because I wanted to have a little portion in the middle that wasn't stamped, because that's where our little birds are going to stand. And once I've got that lined up pretty happily in there, I am going to close the door of my MISTI. And then I want to do some embossing on this background. I found an embossing powder in my stash that will match the blue on the blue-footed boobies really nicely. So I'm going to ink this up with some embossing ink. I did use a magic powder bag, and then I also used my Nuvo brush to kind of brush away any excess powder. But I'm going to stamp that down with my embossing ink. And I want to make sure that I stamped that really, really well. I know that my paper didn't go anywhere, so I'm going to ink this up one more time. And then I'll close the door of the MISTI and just make sure that I've stamped that down. And then I'll pull this out, and I'm going to use the embossing powder. This is actually by Brutus Monroe. It's called Robin's Egg, and I think it was an embossing powder of the month or something like that. So if it's still available, I'll link it. And then we're going to just cover that with that embossing powder, and you'll notice it looks like a hot mess. It looks like that embossing bag didn't do anything, but rest assured, all that you see there, all that extra, like, quote unquote powder, is not the embossing sticky stuff, so don't worry. I'm going to heat set this till that is smooth and melted, and I love it because it has bits of like glitter in it and stuff, and it's just that light blue that's just so pretty. All right, now it's all dry, and we're going to just rub away all of that excess with my microfiber cloth, and voila, we don't have any of that powder sticking to the back. And so now we're ready to trim it down a little bit, because originally this was 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches, which would be the whole front of an A2 size card, but I decided I did want a little bit of a border around it. But before we move on to our card base, I'm going to stamp out the sentiment onto some mocha cardstock. I'll cover that with some alabaster embossing powder, and then I'm going to heat set that till that is smooth and melted. I could have gone with our, the traditional black, but I decided I really wanted to bring in more of that brown from the feathers. And then I'm going to put this into my Tim Holtz guillotine trimmer and trim that down. And then once that is trimmed down, we'll get our card base ready, which is going to be some lunch bag cardstock. I've trimmed that down to 5 1/2 inches by 8 1/2 inches, and I'm scoring that at 4 1/4, so this will be a side folding A2 size card. I did put foam tape all over the back of my birds, and this is the one downside to that Arteza foam tape, is that that release paper is so staticky. Like, I feel like I'm constantly flicking it off my hands, and then it has a mess because it sticks to everything. Not because it's like sticky, but it's just like staticky. And then I'll stick down all 3 of my birds, and then I'm also going to stick down my sentiment. I'm going to use my glass mat to try and line that up as best I can. And then I'll eventually just pick it up and kind of eyeball it, make sure. But before I attach this to the front, I am going to stamp on the inside. So the outside says it's your special day, and then on the inside it says shake it till you make it, which I love. That's cute. And then I'll stamp my little crazy dancing bird with some embossing ink, so it just looks like a watermark on the inside. I'll stamp him all across the bottom. He's fun. And then we'll attach our card panel to our card base just using some liquid glue. And then he's going to be all done for you. I really like how this one turned out. So it could be a masculine card, and this could just be for whatever, maybe a congratulations or something, but I love this card. All right, let's move on to our second card using the Bird Buddies and Jewel Heist background. So for this background, I have pulled out some Sike ink, and I put that all over the middle. And I'm really not that worried about contamination, but if you are, you could just take your microfiber cloth or a cloth and just kind of wipe it up a little bit on each end, which is what I did. And then I used the Remember Me blue on the bottom, and then I've got Bee Sting on the top. And then I'm going to spritz that with some water. I'm holding that. I just did like 2 or 3 spritzes. I held that about maybe 10 inches above it. And then now I'm going to stick some of my stark white cardstock right on top, and then I'm just going to rub that. So I left the stamp right on its packaging, basically. And then look at that. That's one of the things I love about these inks is how they overlap each other. So where the bee sting and the Sike overlapped, you have this beautiful orange. And then where the Remember Me and the Sike overlapped, you have this really pretty green. And so I just love that. And the spritzing of the water just kind of made it almost like a watercolor feel, which is really, really cool. All right, our card base is going to be some more of the stark white cardstock that I had cut down to 5.5 inches by 8.5 inches and scored at 4.25. I am going to go ahead and heat set this since I did use water because I do want to do a die cut over the top. I'm going to cut a circle right out of the center, and originally I was hoping that I could keep that center and maybe use it inside the card, but I know purple tape isn't supposed to tear, but it really did in this case, so I could not keep the center. And I do want this popped up, so I've pulled out just some fun foam that I cut down to be a little bit smaller than that 4.25 inches by 5.5, and then I put one of the circle dies through it to be a little bit bigger than the circle that I used on my card panel. And I'm just going to attach this down with some liquid glue. You'll see that it leaves a nice good border there. And then I'll use that same liquid glue to adhere this down to my card front. Now, or my card base. Now, if I had actually been thinking, which nowadays, I would have stamped my sentiments first, but I wasn't thinking. I did put a little bit of glue on his wings and on his little head, and so that's how I was able to stick down his party hat and both of his little cupcakes. And then I'll wipe up my glue mess, because I did make a glue mess. And here I'm going to go ahead and stick this right inside of my Misty. Like I said, if I had been thinking, I would have stamped first and then adhered all those pieces, but I wasn't thinking. And so I pulled out all the insides of my mini Misty. I've closed the door of my Misty to pick up my sentiments, and then I'll ink those up with some VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. It's just a nice dark black. It did not stamp all the way down, but I just pressed really hard. Thankfully, I had put this in the Misty and didn't try to just freehand stamp it, and it ended up working out. I put some foam tape on the back of my little bird, and so he's popped up too. And then for the inside of my card, I'm going to stamp my sentiment, which says, "Hope your day is impeccable." Love that little pun. And then I'll ink up my little birdie with some of the bee sting. And then I did cut and color a whole nother hat. I don't know why I did, I just did. And so I'll put that hat on top of this little guy on the inside. So it worked out perfectly. And then that's actually going to finish off our second card. I love how that background turned out and our cute little bird holding his little cupcakes. So adorable. All right, for our third card, using the Bird Buddies and Jewel Heist background, we're going to try something a little bit different. As far as folds go, we're going to do a gatefold. So I have just a couple pieces of some purple cardstock from my stash. And these are big. That's what I need. I need them to be a little bit big because I'm not exactly sure how they're going to overlap at this point. So I have covered that background just using some Crown Me ink, and it stamps beautifully. So once again, I just have it on its packaging. That stamp is just on the packaging, no big deal. And I'm just inking it up, and I love these inks. Love them. I can't wait till hopefully Simon comes out with even more colors because I love them. All right, I'm just rubbing on that next piece. And yeah, it's a little bit funky. It looks totally different, and that's okay. I'll use my guillotine trimmer to trim these down just a little bit, not a whole lot, simply because I want these to overlap. And so I'll need a little bit of overlap themselves. You'll see what I mean here in a second. All right, so I'm going to grab out some more of that stark white cardstock and just kind of determining how I want those to be. I'm going to trim down one piece to be 4 inches by 5.5 inches. And then the next piece will be 4.25 inches by 5.5 inches. That's going to be my back piece. And that one, the first one I cut will go on the inside of my card. I've determined that this one is going to get scored. The smaller one is going to get scored at 2 inches, only because I just need it to hang over the top. So you won't even get to see part of that. It's going to be glued to the back. So here's that white piece that I first cut, that 4 inch by 5.5 inches. I'm just going to use glue on one of those ends that was scored, and then we'll fold that right over the top, and basically it's getting glued to the back of my piece. All right, and you'll notice that there is a little bit of hangover on both sides, and I'm not concerned about that because we're going to cut that later. Here I'm trying to line up the next piece because I want those to match as good as possible. And so I've lined them up, and then I'm just going to hold that in place after I flip it over and use a pencil to mark where I need to score it. I'll grab my Scor-Buddy again, kind of determine where that score line will be, flip it over, score it, and it happens to be just at 4 inches, which is perfect. And then I will, just make sure that fold line is good and scored. And then we'll line it up one more time to kind of see where those will line up. I've held that in place, and then I'm going to use that same liquid glue to pop that down. Once again, you'll notice that there is a lot of hangover on the left and right hand side, mostly on that right hand side, but I'm not worried about that. It's going to get chopped off here in a second in my guillotine trimmer, and then you're going to see just how nicely, look at how perfectly those overlap each other. I had already stamped and cut out one of the sentiments that says you're one of my favorite peeps. I love that. And I'm going to just stick that down to one of the flaps with some liquid glue. I'm going to put some foam tape on the bottom half of our little peacock and her babies. And then we'll stick that right over the top of the leftover bits of the sentiment. And so then it's going to be a bit of a gatefold, but not like a perfect gatefold. I need to cover up that back portion, so this is where I'm going to add a little bit more liquid glue, and there's where our second piece of stark white cardstock comes into play. It will leave a little bit of a border on the left and right hand side, but it works perfectly to cover up the mess on the back. And here we have our third and final card. I love, love, love how that turned out too. So very fun. So let's go ahead and take a look at all 3 cards that I made today. I would love to know if you had a favorite out of these 3, if you did in fact have a favorite, or what you think of that background and the little birds. I'd love to know what you think. So go ahead and leave that down in the comment section down below. If you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe if you have not already done so. I typically have 3 to 4 videos a week, and I'd love it if you keep coming by. And as always, thanks for stopping by, and I will see you very soon in the next video. Bye, everybody.